All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
Designers,
and performers.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Volta Percussion. My name is Elanders Frazier. I'm joined by some very good friends and colleagues of mine, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., Mr. John Gaal, and Mr. Ryan Reed. We are very happy to be here to share some of our opinions, thoughts, suggestions, recommendations, and just some things that are on our mind with you this evening. So today we're going to be jumping into a topic that we recently became really passionate about in the last 10 minutes as we were kind of ramping up for this topic, and we've got a lot to get off of our chest, so I'm very excited for us to kind of get into it. We're going to be talking about education versus competition with education, and do we sacrifice one? Is there one that should be sacrificed when we're inside of that conversation? I kind of want to just start off by throwing this over to Ryan, because I know you were kind of getting into it, but maybe Ryan teeing this up just with what's something that you consider when you even bring in competition to the conversation of education?
So the main thing I consider is if the education is great, then the competition should happen naturally out of that. And that doesn't always mean that like you're going to win or your group is going to medal or anything like that, because there's extraneous factors outside of just your group that you have no control over. But it's competition to me is the feeling of being competitive. You know, we don't want to go to competitions and not feel like we're putting our best product forward. And to be a little bit more specific with our example, like our school, the school I teach at, is 6 years old now, 7 years old now. And we compete in the same class as William Mason High School, as a number of other schools that have made semifinals, that are fantastic, established programs. So for us as a 7th year program, to be competitive and winning with those programs is unrealistic. So I kind of have to define competitive success as going out there and being, you know, maybe within a range. Maybe it's this, maybe it's how we feel. Maybe do we come off and feel like we put the most competitive version of ourselves out there? So that's kind of where it comes to mind, like when I'm thinking about competition in the aspect of education. Like if I'm doing my job really, really well, I should be able to reach whatever competitive goals within reason.
But what happens when the upper administration expects more?
I think that's a good question.
Either your principal or your fine arts director of your district, they expect you to get that first place, Ryan. You're not achieving that.
Well,
Tisk.
I've never been in a district where that has been the case, unfortunately. And I think, you know, I think you're in a specific situation, John, where in Texas that kind of is an expectation, at least at some of those bigger schools. But I would say that those are very few and far between outside of Texas, at least in my experience. I think if the administration wants the band to win or wants the music program to win, then their actions, aka how much money they throw at the program and everything, has to back that up. And to that extent, it's like if the band budget's not in the 6 or 7 figures, like I've heard some of these schools that are doing well at BOA is, then I don't know that the administration, what I would do is I would take the administration to a competition to expose them to what that really takes.
Maybe that's a good idea. I probably should have done that. Maybe I could do that later. Because it's funny that this topic's actually being brought up tonight. Because I feel like a lot of us, we just went to our first band competition, or if you're listening to this, maybe you've gone to a couple band competitions already for this season. But my head director and I, we were talking about it because we can see a huge improvement from our band from last year to this year, musically, visually, just from an overall design package of the show. Like definitely things are like, I feel they're noticeably difference, and I think the kids feel it too. They feel a little bit more confident in who they are and what they're doing. Now, do they do it all the time, and do they do it when it needs to happen for the gig? You gotta flip a coin and see what's going to happen. We're still working on that aspect, but he was talking to me about how he had a conversation with our principal, and he was just asking, hey, what is your expectation for the band program? And the principal was just like, oh, we just want the kids to have a really good experience and enjoy doing music. Which, cool, that's awesome, but that is like 180 difference from our, I feel, and he feels, from our district fine arts administration, who they expect us to be competitive against the other districts in our region. And we need to be pulling out ones, which is the best ranking you can get in a UIL evaluation, and anything lower is not acceptable. And so it's just like, how do you balance where your school administration is like, just make sure it's fun for the kids and they have a good time, but then your other boss from the music standpoint is like, you got to be putting it out there and go because I think that really drives that education competition question that we have. Because if on one side you have the administration from your school saying just good time, and that's how all the other teachers are presenting it in their programs of dance or athletics or academics, etc., to a certain extent. Now, I can't speak for everyone because I don't teach those classes, as you could say. What suggestions do you guys have on how to balance both? What are your thoughts?
My first thought would be, like Ryan said, just talking about the responsibility and like what that actually looks like. Because I would say, even as it relates to kids, I work in a school district where, two of my bands that I designed for are like 15 minutes away from each other. One's a very small band, one's maybe like 140, 150-ish or so. And the bigger band, like, they do a lot of stuff. They have a band director that's been there for almost probably 15 years. He started as a drum guy, took over as the, band director. They have an indoor drum line. Like, they're into the marching arts thing. They're playing at GMEA this year. So, he's been building that program. The other school, they had significant amount of band director turnover as the pandemic was starting. They have a great band director, and they're just building something. So it has to be a conversation of education beyond just the members, or just beyond the members, like learning how to play. It has to be an education for them to understand like what it takes for something like that to happen. Because I know, even as a high schooler, like, you could see other bands be like, man, they have this really cool drum break, this, like, why aren't we doing this? And my instructor had to show me like, okay, hey, you see all those people standing over there with backpacks? All those people play drums. All those people are teaching that drum line and that front ensemble. Now look at who's on this sideline. It's me. So how do you expect that we're going to be able to do the same thing that it takes 4 or 5 other people to do? When the band rolls on, do you see all those parents that are like out there helping? What, you're wondering why we don't have that set? Look at the parents that are there. So I feel like that's a part of the educational process too, is when it comes down to competing. I think that is very important, but there has to be education on all sides. One of the things that I learned from Terry Sanders, to your point, or whoever's point that said something about bringing them to a contest, was, like Little League. When parents support their kids doing Little League and they come out there and they see another team's like barbecuing for the kids before the game, they're not going to be outdone. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, okay, I'm going to bring my grill. Oh, they got custom jerseys, and like all the dads got jerseys, or all the moms got cheerleading, whatever. Like, it's competitive. Like, that's the tribal nature of us as human beings. Like, we all want to compete because we all want to be seen as special and individual and feel a sense of belonging. So I feel like even from a band director or even an administrative standpoint, the question is, okay, hey, if you want to do that, that's great. I want to compete too. These are the things that we need in order to be competitive on the level that you're seeing. And I feel like that's going to do one or two things. Either they're going to be like, okay, I'm not sure that we can invest that much, or maybe I didn't want it as much as I thought I did. Or they're going to be like, okay, maybe we can't do that right now, but let's create a plan, a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan. Man, you guys, this other band, they were really cool. All the electronics and the sounds and blah, 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 blah. Man, we only got 2 speakers. Let's create a plan as to how we can get electronics up to that level. They have all these other instructors. Let's create a plan as to how we can get our budget up to this or that or whatever. So to me, if people are wanting you to be competitive, and I would say this for an instructor or a director as well, they have to invest on the level of competition that they want to see. Obviously, a lot of it is education wise and making sure that your students are taught, but there are some just basic nuts and bolts that, like, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to compete in the landscape of, what the activity is right now.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, there's different levels of competition too, right? Like it doesn't have to be a 1-for-1 in comparison, right? Like, you don't have to look at the highest performing with all the bells and whistles program and say that if I'm not that, I'm not doing anything. Like, you can still be a very high performing program that just does it with less resources and a different vehicle, right? So I think perspective has to come into that conversation too. And I will say that is a lot harder to get parents to understand, is the perspective of the fact that just because it's not 1-to-1 of what you see doesn't mean that it's not competitive. And I think WGI helps the perspective a little bit because of how they do classification. Marching band doesn't help the perspective because of how they group us by school size. You know what I mean? Because it's like they don't break us down as small as we could be. Sometimes it does when they do band class sizes. But even then, it's like you still have such a variance in the size of that size of band, like the lowest number of a 5A band versus the largest number of a 5A band, but both of them are still considered 5A. That can be a huge variance of resources, exposure to. So, I mean, like, it's never 1-to-1, and trying to get people to understand that. I definitely think we're on the right pathway by getting actual exposure, which is why I love it when they do shout outs and administrations show up at band competitions. They're like, they do the president shout out, like, we got our superintendent in the audience, this afternoon, they wave it and stuff, because you want them to see, like, what's going on. This is what's happening. This is why we ask for these resources, so we can put everybody on the same level playing field, right? But the perspective, I think, has to be a part of that conversation too. And that's a difficult thing to add, for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing to tag off of E is there's different echelons in all those classes. Like, if you're talking about being competitive, you're not going to go from, 24th place to first place in a year, but like, you're going to, if you break from like 24th to 12th in a year, like, that's you just competed into a different echelon.
Mm-hmm.
If you go from 12th to 6th, you just competed into a different echelon. So I think you have to quantify it not just also as like, well, we have to win to be competitive. There's a lot of different meanings that can be to competition. And a little bit. I was thinking about this. We were at a BOA regional early season, just watching some of the bands that were going by, and the different, like, knowing some of those programs and knowing the backgrounds of some of those programs. Like, there's one program walking by and it's like they've got an amazing concert band and they play Midwest and they spend all their time on like fundamentals, but they've got a gigantic staff. So like the student to teacher ratio is like pretty good to get everybody information and that kind of stuff. And there's another band making finals. Like, we're walking by this group and it's like, well, this group has, a winds group and a percussion group and a guard, and they have a great concert band and they do marching band really well. And it's like those kids are constantly being exposed to like the marching arts and competing at the highest level and that kind of stuff. And I think that is also part of that conversation of like, if you want to be competitive, you have to be competitive. You have to start to push the competitive nature in everything. So like, does the district offer, if you're a low income district, does the district offer supplemental lessons? Does it offer to bring teachers in, or master classes, or that kind of stuff? I don't think it's feasible to go, we just want to be competitive in marching band. I think you have to be competitive in kind of all aspects of the program. Again, whatever that means for you from a goal standpoint. But I think it almost is like just building a competitive culture and a culture of success.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because
I think when we're saying
Oh, go ahead.
competitive, we also mean, like you said, a culture of success. What does it mean to be successful? You could say that's synonymous for competitive, if as it relates to your context. Because then we go into the definition of what's competition and what's success. And I think we've already talked about that on many episodes before, so I don't want to reopen that Pandora's box and whatnot.
I think that's something though that everyone has to kind of define for themselves too. That I think that's good for the members and good for the program in general, so that they understand like what competitive success is for them. And to me, what I think about competitive success being like constantly evolving for the better, so that you're setting a new standard for yourself. Obviously, like Ryan was saying, there are certain competitive things that you don't have control over, like the number that someone puts down on a sheet, or the comparative analysis of like who was in your class at a particular contest can drastically change what place you might come in. But how did we feel as it relates to like our preparation for the performance? How do we feel about the production level and the engagement that the students had this year versus last year? How did we feel about the execution level on the individual level from each player this year versus last year? Those are all, I feel like, real barometers for success, so that they can know, okay, yeah, we're shooting for this ultimate outer form of success of like, markers, I guess, milestones, if you will, like actually being first in our class or getting a superior rating or excellent or whatever your, record is. But at the same time, like out on our journey there, that doesn't mean that we can't experience success in the journey to getting to that milestone. And I feel like that's the only thing that I feel like can be detrimental when people are talking about competition, is if you don't frame it properly for your students, it can be very dejecting to them if you don't give them a realistic understanding of, hey, like Ryan said, this is the echelon that we're in. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, for Southwind last year, for them to go from where they've been in percussion to be in third place, humongous deal. Very, very, very big success. During semifinals, to be competitive and beat some of the world-class groups that they beat in percussion. Very big deal, very big success. Like, were we like gonna compete with like Blue Devils or somebody? No, duh. That's a different echelon, like Ryan was talking about. So like that's an unrealistic understanding of success. But that doesn't mean just because we're not in the running for like a Fred Sanford that like that group and those members didn't have any success.
Yeah, and I think we can't let go of the fact that that ebbs and flows over time too, right? Because even with the echelon, you may have a stream of 4 or 5 years where competitive success means one thing, and then the next 4 or 5 years, if you're still in that same program, competitive success means something completely different. I think we have to have certain minimums, and we've talked about this before, having non-negotiables that will always be ever present inside of a program, that you will never let a certain standard fall below, that the kids not only understand, the parents not only understand, your administration understands, right? That everyone is on the same page, that regardless of where we end up, these are the things that will never change about this program. Now, where we get to, these things can absolutely change depending upon some of the things that transpire. How much pre-education do the students have coming into the program? How attentive are the parents in the terms of how they volunteer and participate? How attentive are the students when they get into class? What opportunities do we have for extended education, like Ryan said, clinicians, lesson programs, etc.? All those things can change depending upon what's happening. We saw it happen during the pandemic. I know a lot of programs that were on the rise, and then that pandemic hit, brick wall, and now they're kind of back at the starting point of that graph. You know what I mean? Some programs didn't get affected at all. It just depends on where you were at, what your resource level was, etc. But that can change over time. I think that, I think sometimes the conversation with competition always goes towards, you can't be competitive without sacrificing something. And I know for us, but I think for some people, they're always trying to find out, what is it that you're sacrificing to be competitive? And I think what we're trying to say is that what we're sacrificing does not have to ultimately mean that it's going to be a negative experience. Because yes, you are sacrificing some time. Yes, you are sacrificing ultimately some, intangible things that, probably I can't put into words right now because I won't know it until I'm in it, right? But ultimately, that doesn't mean that my kids have a negative experience because we are competitive or we choose to be competitive. My kids still have a great experience. You could go talk to any of my students right now and ask them, do you have fun when you show up to rehearsal? Absolutely. Do you work hard when you show up to rehearsal, or is there an expectation for you to work hard? Absolutely. Does E play around? No, he does not. You know what I mean? Like, so all those things can be true at the same time, depending upon how you spin it and depending upon what the culture is. And that culture work comes back to play, right? Depending upon what the culture is ultimately in the program. But I don't think a negative connotation has to be surrounded around the word competition. And I feel like sometimes it only seems to become negative when we're talking about something that is related to art, whether it's music, whether it's ballet, dance, things that are considered artistic, because I feel like when we're talking about sports, it never turns negative when we're talking about competition. That's just how sports is. And it's like, okay, well, we can compete in other things too. Yeah, hell, the Olympics happen every 2 years and all they do is compete. That doesn't mean it's negative. I mean, well, I'm talking winter and summer. Got to give them all credit, right? So
All credit.
winter and summer, right? So I mean, they and technically those performers are competing year round. They're not just competing at the Olympics. They're doing world championships and they're training, et cetera, et cetera. But how dare you say that every experience that they have is negative because they're competing consistently to push themselves to be better and to show what can be done in these sports around the world. Same thing that we do for art, same thing that professional musicians do, the same thing that professional artists do. There's so much that we can learn about ourselves in the world through pushing ourselves to be competitive just in the world itself. And think about how much that's going to set us up for life later on. And I think that's why we do it. But I don't know if everyone understands that's the purpose that we do it. And they just kind of see it as, well, maybe this is not the right stage of life that they need to learn those lessons. And I question, and this is a question that I pose for you all too, if not now, when?
Well, so I have a lot of thoughts based off of what you just said. The first thing is, when we talk about like that sacrifice and we talk about the member experience or the student experience, we always seem to forget, like, are the kids having fun? Yes. Okay. In most programs, yes. It's almost impossible to do something and not have fun unless it's just a miserable program. And I have seen very, very few of those, if any. But the question we never ask is, are you learning? We never ask the students, are you learning? Are you competitive? Are you having a good time? Well, if you're competing, you must be working harder, which means you're having less fun but are they learning? I mean, our job is educators. Like, we have moved away from the name of technicians. If you look at most drum corps pages, they're like websites, they're moving away from the term technicians and more into the term of educators. You know, some drum corps are bringing on educational consultants. Some are bringing on mindset coaches to like coach the entire human. And I think we're moving away from that. So I think we have to start asking ourselves, to be competitive, do we really have to sacrifice education? Or do we have to maybe look at our priorities and reprioritize things? You know, for me, I was telling you guys before the call, and I think I've said it on the podcast before, is like, we go a very unconventional route at my high school of doing marching band percussion, because we've got a WGI concert group. Our top band plays at our regional Music for All festival, top concert band, and our top concert band played at our state convention last year. And we're in the process in the near 3 to 5 year future of starting to record and trying to submit tapes for Midwest and other conventions. But that's a 3 to 5 year plan. You know, we could get it right. We could get it sooner than that, if we were just like, all right, we're just going to teach the notes on the page and this and that and the other thing. And I think when people look at the marching arts, they look at a lot of those successful programs and they go, well, they're teaching the test. They're just teaching the thing that the kids are being evaluated on. And there is some truth behind that, because there are some groups that do that. There are some groups that just want the cheap thrills and the trophies, and they do that. And that's a fact of life, but that's a fact of life of everywhere. And going back to the competing thing that he was talking about, dating's competing. Everything in life is competing. Getting your driver's license is competing, like you're competing against the test. So is it really too early? I don't think it's too early, as long as we frame competition within the context of, are you competing and learning and getting better, or are you just learning the test? Which I would argue, those programs that are just teaching the test will, one, only be able to do a version of that same test over and over again, but also their process will look the same all the time, and growth will happen in this box. Whereas when you educate, like, the actual student, the box gets bigger. And yeah, there's some highers and there's some lowers, but there's more of a chance for you to go outside of a box in both directions. And the thing I was talking about with the unconventional way that we do that with our program is we just don't march bass drums during the fall. And there are some people that be like, well, that's not what drumline is, and that, but it's a percussion sheet. And at no point, I've never seen on a sheet in the circuits that I've been a part of where it says you have to have bass drums, or you have to have tenors, or you have to have a drum line. I think you have to make the best decisions for your students. And then if you want to be competitive, you have to know the sheet really well. And I went into critique this past weekend, sat down with a judge, was like, this is some really great stuff. I love what you're doing. You don't march a bass line, but you don't need a bass line based on what you're doing with the other instrumentation. Like, you cover that voice really well. He's like, and this was a judge saying this to me. He's like, now, not everyone's going to understand that or give you credit for that. And I said, but it doesn't say that on the sheet. It doesn't say I have to have these things on the sheet. It just says percussion. And because we choose to treat it like a percussion ensemble versus a drum line, doesn't mean I'm sacrificing education of the kids or the competitiveness. It just means that I'm taking advantage of this avenue to maximize both of these things. And I understand that, yes, the groups that have full drum lines and full front ensembles, we will have to do different things to be more competitive with those groups because there's more opportunity for recognition for those groups.
Yeah.
So
I think the thing that's really good to keep in mind is that regardless of whatever it is, there's a way that you can win competitively. There's a whole bunch of different, or at least I can say as far as WGI is concerned, I feel like with the way that they do classifications, there are a lot of different versions of a class champion. And I feel like that's the encouraging thing, that like, okay, the competition is, or the reason why the goal is what the goal is because we want to get better at the fastest rate that we can possibly get better. And as a director, if I'm trying to get better the fastest way that I can get better, then that means I need to know how to program and educate effectively for my group and whatever classification that they're in. And I feel like there is a faction of people that dislike the competitive aspect because they are not good at competing. They don't understand the idiom as it is, and they're not willing to maybe do that work. And it is a lot easier to be like, well, this group wins because they use big props. This group wins because their front ensemble is bigger than ours. This group wins because, you know, they do this type of show and people don't get our show. They don't like what we do. And it's like, no, there are people that have done those types of shows that they've won, right? They haven't done a very straightforward show, right? There's groups that don't use props that have won before, right? Maybe that, like Ryan said, because of the way that the activity is trending, maybe that gives them more opportunities. But again, if you're good at competing and you're good at showing how it is that you're getting better in your particular way that you're designing things, that's your opportunity to go in there and critique and talk about, hey, well, I feel like what my members are doing deserves a little bit more credit for the creativity, the originality, this, and this, because we don't rely on large props. We don't rely on, you know, a separate visual line. You know, the simultaneous responsibility is on the members to be able to do all this choreography and be able to play at a high level, and they're able to do both of those things. You know, so I feel like that's an aspect of the competition that needs to be like embraced. That like when members see that we're embracing the competitive aspect of like every year the shows get better, every year the concept that's being given to them, the music, things are getting better from an educational standpoint. I think that members pick up on that. And they feel that energy and momentum, and they're like, okay, we want to be better than last year's group. Like, man, they already gave us the music. Like, this seems like way more engaging. Like, everything feels more produced, more filled in. Like, okay, we got to go harder than last year. Because ultimately, your competition is yourself, right? If you're not setting new standards for yourself, then I question whether or not you're actually competing. Because, I mean, you could be first place, and everyone else just suck. Like, that is a possibility. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, we are like the minor league, you know, we are like the T-ball champs of the world. That don't mean that you could beat the Braves or the Yankees. You know what I mean? It just means that everyone else sucks a lot more than you do. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's also kind of faulty to make other people and placements your barometer for success. Because what if those other people are really bad? You're kind of stuck and you're capped, because say for instance, you're like, oh, I want to beat the group that won last year. What if they suck this year? Like I've seen that happen before. The next year they come out, they're not even good. And you're like, oh, I was worried about beating that group and they're not even making finals or they're not having a great year. You got to focus on yourself and focus on your program and like what you're trying to build and what you're trying to compete against yourself.
Here's a question for everybody. Going back to our original question of education versus competition. All right. In regards to marching band, you could probably do any aspect. But would you rather have an easy book to teach and focus on the skill sets, growing the musician educationally that way, because clean is clean at the end of the day? Or would you rather have a hard book and teach those skill sets to get the student up to that level, knowing that full on well, you can always water the book down, but you're working on those more advanced skill sets? Does that make sense? Would you rather teach an easy book and focus on strong fundamentals and potentially more advanced concepts, even though that will not directly be applied to a show until maybe a different context, maybe not for marching band, maybe more concert or indoor or whatnot? Or would you rather teach advanced concepts and work towards it like an uphill battle, seeing the growth hopefully, but also know ultimately you're going to lower those skill sets, you're going to water down the book because you knew from the beginning, you planned that you bit off more than you could chew? What are y'all's thoughts?
I think the approach that I always take is to always give the performers something that is at or right below their achievement level. And the reason I say at or right below is because if you are educating them in a way that is consistently elevating their understanding of vocabulary and their understanding of vocabulary and musicality, then I think them having something that is at their current knowledge level, and that's knowledge level, that's not achievement level, right? Because there's a difference. You can understand a lot more in life than you're able to achieve. I understand the game of baseball. Doesn't mean I'm about to go out there and swing a pitch. You know what I'm saying? Like I follow it with the best of them, and I love go White Sox, but I ain't going out to the plate. You know what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is I always try to make sure that the students try to have something that is at their level of understanding, even if the achievement level is under, so that we are working towards that achievement. Because what I would never want to do is give them a sense of failure because it started out that way. They started out with a sense of failure because they were given something that was well above their understanding, well above their level of achievement. And now what I've indicated to them was that, well, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you never had the possibility of achieving this anyway, so we're having to water it down. And I think that's a big disparity in having to water something down that had levels of achievement, but just could not maintain consistency, right? There's a big difference to water something down that couldn't remain consistent versus watering something down that they could never achieve in the first place, right? And that's heartbreaking, because a kid can understand if you take something out because they couldn't do it consistently versus you're taking it out because they could just never do it, right? Like I can never get this scrape pattern, so we got to take it out of the book. Well, why did you write the scrape pattern then? You know what I mean? Like you wrote above their heads at that point, or you wrote a permutation that was above their heads at that point. So I think that's something that you have to consider, the functionality of what you're asking your students to do. And obviously, you know your students best. But I also think the part two answer to that is that you have to have a good understanding of the amount of time that you have, because with more time, I think you can do a greater ask of your students. With less time, you can't, right? So I think you can push the boundaries a little more with more time, which is why I live. I've trying to stop saying die, live or live by this comment. With any person that asks me for advice when it comes to instructors instructing a percussion section or a drum line, is that do the most teaching that you can in the off season as concert season ends until the first football game, because that is the longest stretch of time that you've got to really pour knowledge into those students when they really don't have the responsibility of like performing in front of somebody. And that's really where you can really break things down to a fundamental level and just build them all the way back up to the top. You know, that's that April, May, June, July timeframe, right? Because they really don't get another opportunity outside of that where they're not affected by what's going on in school, Christmas break with families, all this other jazz that's happening, right? And yes, they're going to experience some summer vacation and stuff like that, but really the level of mental energy that's happening in their heads over the summer really depletes for a lot of it. And you can take up some of that space with what you're asking them to do there versus during the school year, trying to ask them to start learning all this stuff in huge waves. Then it's not to say that it should go down to zero. It should just kind of be at like, you know, maybe the 4 or 5% during the school year, and then ramp that thing up to like 30-40% over the summer, so that you're really getting it in over the summer. And then as the school year, you're dropping new hints of knowledge, but you're really just trying to maintain what they learned. And that way the growth stays consistent, right? It's like looking at a stock market chart. You don't want your stock market to look like this, right? You don't want that thing to look like that. That's bad, right? You want it to go up. And yeah, it's going to go down a little bit, but you really kind of want it to stabilize like this. And you want it to just kind of ride. And I think that's where we ultimately want our students' knowledge base to go. And I feel like if you're giving them something that's unachievable, you're basically setting them up to derail.
Yeah, I think off your question, John, and I'll just take it from the experience I've had the last couple of years, my second winter at my school was the virtual season. And we did a quote unquote easy show for those kids. Because when I got there, like the skill sets were low and their ability to hear and play like clean was relatively low as well. And I said, we're going to do an easy show, but we're going to really learn what it sounds like to be clean. So we went about the approach of like, let's do an easier show, but let's push their oral skills. Let's push some of those other things. Like, what do you have to think about on any given timeline of the show to make sure that this thing is clean, you know, and teaching them how rehearsal processes work and that kind of stuff. But now we're to the point for this marching band show where I go a little bit different. I go at the kids level or slightly above to give the kids challenges. Like a hair above. But also to try and motivate the kids of like, hey, Ryan believes in us. Like, I got to do a little bit of workout here to make sure that like I can achieve this thing because he believes in me enough to challenge me more to do this. And trying to push the kids through skills that way that they will use then later in percussion ensemble and the winter percussion stuff. So I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to go about it. I think you just have to ask, like, for lack of a better term, like, what's the biggest fire and what do I have to do to put that out? If the biggest fire is, hey, we just don't play clean, then do a little bit easier show and teach the kids like what real clean is, what real clarity is. And if they play with a pretty good level of clarity, then start to push their skills a little bit. And, you know, you might, as you push their skills for a couple of years, you might sacrifice a little bit of clarity. But again, if you go back and you teach them what clean is and how to think through like a performance and how to think through rehearsal, you might sacrifice it just for a little bit. You won't like, oh, now we're going from like A class to open class, so we got to go back to like we're super dirty and we have to learn how to be clean again. No, we just got to be clean, which we learned here at this level now.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like the younger version of me probably would have taken version B, and the older version of me would take version A. Honestly, as it relates to like designing and stuff like that, I feel like it's kind of like, mixing a cocktail. Like, you kind of get the how should I say this? Well, that's fine. Everyone understands what I'm saying. Like when you're in college, you know what I mean? Like maybe you start drinking these kind of pre-mixed things that are just all like it's already done for you, you know what I mean? Like the flavor profile and all that, like all the things are already like done for you, you know what I mean? But like when you're learning to put things together, the way that you would any other elements, like sometimes you get the mix wrong. You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, there's so much alcohol in this, I might as well just took a shot. And like that is a version of like this is way too hard for these kids. Like this is just too much. This is absolutely too much. You know what I mean? But I feel like as you continue to experiment, like you get that mix to where it's like this is just right. Like it's not like one thing is overtaking the other thing. Like it's actually complementing each other and like coming into something that like is nice and beautiful and palatable. Right. So I feel like the more you continue designing, the more you can figure out where that line is. Because one of the things that I remember, I don't know if it was Rob Ferguson that I remember saying this, but he was talking about, because I know a lot of independent groups have different levels of different ways of competing. And he was I think it might have been him that was talking about, how he writes things for it to be clean and like precise at the end of the season. And he's thinking about like all of this time and trajectory. Like if it's immediately clean, obviously he works with an independent group, right? If it's immediately clean, it might just be too easy. If it's like immediately pristine, right? There's no growth there. There's no opportunity to grow as a performer because they already know everything, right? But if you put that challenge level, like Ryan was saying, I think I'm probably definitely a slightly above person, then my hope is that I'm designing it in a way that when you get to the end of the season, you'll be able to do every single thing at the highest possible level that you can do it at. So that's kind of what I would say. I mean, I definitely feel like younger me would definitely take the other option. It's just like, let's just build skills. It doesn't matter. We sound like crap anyway. And this is our first year, blah, 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 blah. Like, let's work on Flam 5-5lets or something, just something dumb.
That's rough. Man,
I would never do that. Obviously,
why would you want to do that?
I'm being facetious.
I want the kids to be successful.
Well, there's also
inverted flam taps. Let's go.
But they have to be 5lets, though. They have to be 5lets.
there's also nothing that says you can't do both. Like just because you're trying to push skill sets doesn't mean for your 4.5-minute indoor show or your 7-minute marching band show that you have to push the envelope for all 7 minutes or all 4.5 minutes. Like our front ensemble windows are pushing open class skill are definitely open class skill sets. Like, but there's a lot of A class skills, some that people would argue are regional A skills. And I think that's what a lot of, like, you look at the middle of any class, which is what the paradigm of that class is. And it's like, it's not all open class is not open class all the time for a lot of groups. It's really open class moments and A class moments. And then maybe you got your snare line or one section can pull out like a borderline world class thing, but then you go back to some more A class stuff. Like just because you can play flam drags doesn't mean you should play 7 minutes of flam drags. Maybe throw a tap 5 in there. Maybe throw a paradiddle in there. Maybe throw a paradiddle diddle in there that the kids can already do. Yeah.
If y'all don't know this vocab, you need to go figure out your rudiments.
All 40 of them.
You have just been called out by John Gaal. No, I agree. Though. I feel like the groups that do it very well, like they're very smart about it. And honestly, if you study the activity, I think you can tell how people get their vocabulary out. Like obviously, they're not playing stuff that's world class all the time. They're not doing world class visual vocabulary all the time. But like they plan their moments out, like you said, like to take the risk in the moments that you want. Okay, this is a moment I want them to grow in. And then all the other stuff is about the execution. So that like 85% of it's just like, all right, great, we got that. I mean, everybody knows that, you know, even groups like Blue Devils, sometimes they spend like the majority of the summer cleaning like this many sets of beats. But the rest of the stuff is just kind of like, we know that. You just need to knock the dust off.
If you have to clean everything, nothing's going to be really clean at the end.
Fact.
Wait,
some wise words. Can you say that one
you
more
have
time?
to clean everything?
Yeah, if you really have to break down and clean every single beat of the show, nothing's going to be super clean at the end. Like, there's got to be some stuff the kids can just pull out and play on a consistent level with very little work. So that way you can work on the moments that need that demand and that time.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I kind of
like that.
I kind of look at it as an understanding of like this, right? If you're a restaurateur or a chef that works in a restaurant and you're building out a menu, if it takes you all the brain power in the world to make every single thing on that menu, how successful is that restaurant going to be? Like, there's
That's
got
called a Michelin star restaurant. And
but
I like
listen,
that.
though,
Thank you very much.
No, but what I'm saying to Ryan's point, there's got to be some things on that menu that are like this for you. That's like, oh, I learned that in year 1 of culinary school. Breadsticks, I learned that on year 1. You know, like asparagus, a fried asparagus in a skillet, I learned that on year. You know what I mean? Like, there are
year
certain
7.
you know what I mean? Like, there are certain intangible, you know, things that just come with being in that environment that you should know. And I think this is a really good tie back into where we started with, which is the education aspect of it, which is, if you really value education, then by doing that, you are getting a true understanding and demonstration of where your students are with education, because you are every year you are seeing how much do they actually know from the jump. By what I've written, this is what they should, by the statement of what I'm presenting to them, and kind of by Ryan's words, what is immediately clean from day one. This is the statement of what they know to be true from day one, meaning this is education wise. This is something they can do forwards and backwards with very little thought. The stuff that they're having a little work on, this is the stuff that we got to work towards, right? So maybe that's the stuff that stuck from last year. Let's look at the stuff now that we have to build towards next year. And then maybe the next year, there's more stuff that we can check off that list that are already taken care of on day one. And now we can continue to press towards working more stuff and continue to build that program up.
Cool. Well said.
Good gems in here.
Very well said. Loved it.
I'm hungry. Time to go eat.
I'm gonna clip that out of here, John.
You talk about food. You were saying breadsticks and asparagus. I'm like, okay, it's dinner time.
Oh, with that, as always, you can find us on social media. You can join us at Instagram at the handle @Volta Percussion. You can also view this podcast on YouTube at the same @Volta Percussion. If you have any ideas for any topics or want to just reach out to us to see how things are going, it's nice to check up on people. You can reach out to us at voltapercussion@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, all of our listeners around the world. As always, these episodes will continue to drop for the remainder of the year. I think we're going to be going to a bi-weekly schedule. So just make sure that you've got your alerts set on your podcast channels. And if you're not already following us on social medias, you'll be seeing us drop content there from time to time, just letting you know as episodes are getting ready to drop soon. So is anything else, y'all, for today? All good? Awesome. All right.
Good teaching leads to good stuff.
Ooh.
Just keep that in mind.
Gotta drop that on the YouTube shorts.
Tell them nothing caps a performer's ability to, or a group's ability to compete like their inept instructor. So hopefully as instructors we all like get our game up, because most of the times if our group isn't competing, it's usually us, or our kids could be boneheads, because that's also probable.
Tough pills to swallow. All right. It's been a joy. Thank you for spending some time with us. Once again, my name is Elanders Frazier, joined by Mr. John Gaal, Mr. Ryan Reed, and Mr. Robert Dickens Jr. Thank you so very much. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace out.
Peace.
Now go forth and teach.
Please keep that in.
Yes. Please keep that in.